The first distress signal arrived wrapped in layers of static and foreign encryption, intercepted by a long-range listening post orbiting Ganymede. Most of it was garbled nonsense, but one phrase managed to survive translation protocols. Biological incursion. Unknown pathogens. Requesting immediate xenomedical assistance. Isael Ander was in the middle of scraping fungal cultures off a decaying tree stump when the call reached the emergency coordination team on Earth. He didn't hear about it until the following morning when a UN liaison officer showed up at the mycology lab in Asheville, North Carolina, interrupting a particularly stubborn experiment with Penicillium rubens. "You're needed in orbit," the officer said with a voice that didn't leave room for negotiation. Isael blinked. "I work with mold." "Yes," the officer replied. "And apparently, so does the thing killing the aliens." 2 days later, Isael stood aboard the research vessel Calypso 4, peering through a transparent bulkhead at the alien patient restrained behind multiple containment fields. It looked like a cross between a cephalopod and a skeletal starfish, its limbs twitching erratically. Dark lesions pulsed along its translucent skin, and every so often, a sharp movement would eject a puff of greenish mist from its body. "They keep venting spores," said Captain Nyril, a tall, slate-skinned alien with 3 arms and a lopsided gait. "We've lost 6 crew. The parasite adapts to everything. Nothing works." Isael adjusted his mask. "How long has it been infected?" 17 rotations. It started with confusion. "Now it can't recognize its own name." Isael glanced at the biometric readouts. "The spore structure is fungal, not bacterial. That's why antibiotics failed." "Yes, we realized that too late," Nyril said, turning away. "You are the only one we could find with a specialization in terrestrial fungal counteragents and live sample experimentation. You've cultivated mold that survives in jet fuel. You made that terrible bread that ate its own packaging." Isael exhaled through his nose. "That was an accident." "So is this," Nyril said grimly, nodding toward the patient. The ship's lab was barely large enough for Isael to set up a makeshift culture station. He unpacked his kit, carefully laying out Petri dishes, agar, and the homegrown fungal samples he'd insisted on bringing. Within 6 hours, he had isolated a sample of the alien parasite's spore cloud and was already running comparative growth tests with several strains of mold from Earth. The parasite behaved like a hybrid. It consumed organic tissue, but also exhibited mycorrhizal behavior, creating networks between infected hosts, as if it were trying to build an intelligent colony. Isael watched one culture absorb a mouse liver in under 40 minutes. He turned to the on-board physician, a small, yellow-hued alien named Vel. "How have you been treating this? Antifungals, radiation cleansing, thermal flushing?" Isael winced. "You're making it stronger, it's learning." Vel's eyes narrowed. "You're saying it's intelligent. I'm saying it's adaptive. Like mold. If it's anything like some of the extremophile fungi on Earth, then it's rewriting itself every time you try to kill it." Vel muttered something Isael didn't understand and left. Outside the lab, a containment breach alarm blared. Isael dropped his tool and bolted for the corridor, following the emergency lights. He arrived just in time to see Nyril's second officer, a smaller alien named Tech, collapse to the floor, convulsing. A fine mist leaked from her mouth. "No one touch her," Isael shouted. "Seal off the corridor." He knelt beside her, reading vitals from his wrist pad. Tech's body temperature had spiked. Her heart rate was erratic. Isael pulled a swab from his kit and collected a sample from her neck. Back in the lab, he transferred the swab to a sealed dish and added a few drops of a modified penicillium extract he'd developed for antifungal testing. The parasite recoiled. Within minutes, the outer membrane of the spore began to rupture. Isael leaned closer. "You don't like that, do you?" He pushed the test further, combining the extract with another compound derived from a rare mold found in the catacombs beneath Paris, a strain he'd spent 6 months studying for its bizarre resistance to antibiotics. The result was dramatic. The parasite structure collapsed entirely. No spores, no mist, just inert sludge. He called Nyril to the lab. "I've got something. It's not a cure yet, but it's a direction." Nyril inspected the dish. "How fast can you produce more?" "Depends. I need a bioreactor." "And a lot of time." "You have neither. Another has fallen ill, one of our engineers." Isael rubbed his temples. "Then I'll have to work with what I can grow." Over the next 72 hours, Isael worked without sleep. He synthesized small doses of the extract and administered them to the infected crew under strict protocols. Some improved, some didn't. The parasite was mutating again. Frustrated, Isael returned to his cultures, trying combinations he hadn't dared before. One mold in particular, a strain of Trichoderma he'd found growing in a World War II-era munitions dump, showed promise. It didn't kill the parasite, but instead forced it into dormancy. Isael stared at the result. "If I can keep it asleep long enough, maybe the immune system can catch up." He combined the Trichoderma with the Parisian mold, adjusting ratios until he had a stable dose. The first test subject, a maintenance worker named Core, responded within hours. Fever dropped. Spore cloud dissipated. Cognition returned. Nyril came to see him that night. "You may have saved him." Isael didn't look up. "One is not enough. I need to know it wasn't a fluke." He got his second chance when a trader ship docked, unaware of the quarantine. 2 more infections. Isael administered the new dose. Both stabilized. It was working. But then came the backlash. The parasite, sensing the threat, triggered a mass activation in the dormant hosts. 3 began seizing at once. 1 died before Isael could reach him. The parasite inside him exploded, releasing a cloud that flooded the medbay. Isael dove for the emergency seal button, slamming it shut before the spores could reach the ventilation system. He stayed inside with the infected crew, donning a full hazmat suit. He spent the next hour injecting the antidote into each host, watching for responses. 2 recovered. 1 didn't. When the door finally reopened, Isael stumbled out, coughing. His vitals were a mess. His hands trembled. Nyril caught him as he fell. "You're infected," Nyril said. Isael nodded slowly. "So let's see if I can save myself." They wheeled him into the medbay. Vel administered the dose under Isael's instructions. The fever hit fast. Hallucinations followed. He saw the parasite in his veins crawling through his nervous system. He woke up 40 hours later with a tube down his throat and Vel hovering nearby. "You survived," Vel said. "Barely," Isael blinked. "Then it works." Nyril entered the room. "We've begun synthesizing your compound. With proper distribution, we can contain the outbreak." Isael tried to sit up and failed. "You'll need to rotate strains. Keep it guessing. Don't let it adapt." "We'll listen," Nyril said. "We've learned from you." Isael lay back, exhausted. "Just don't forget to clean your air filters." Vel looked puzzled. "Why?" Isael exhaled. "Because mold always comes back," and then, for the first time in days, he allowed himself to sleep. The corridor outside the quarantine lab trembled again as another sterilization burst flushed through the air ducts. Isael sat propped against the wall, still pale, wrapped in a thermal blanket that smelled faintly of bleach and citrus. His stomach rumbled, but the thought of food made his throat tighten. Vel handed him a small pouch of electrolyte gel. Isael took it without a word and sipped. "I reviewed your blood work," Vel said, crouching beside him. "You're still producing trace amounts of the compound." "That's not abnormal," Isael muttered. "Some fungi take up residence, they don't always leave." Vel tilted his head, mandibles twitching slightly. "Are you saying the treatment colonized your system, maybe, or it's just residue?" "Either way, I'm still breathing." Nyril approached, her uniform jacket tied around her waist, revealing a lattice of scars along her side that weren't there 2 days ago. "We've stabilized 14 crew. 2 didn't make it, the rest are being monitored." "Your mixture holds for now." Isael rubbed his face. His hands ached. "You said the parasite spreads through airborne spores. How did it get on this ship in the first place?" Nyril's gaze flicked to the sealed lab. "It boarded with cargo from the Barian Drift." A salvage team picked up debris from a derelict. No signs of life, but the spores were dormant. We didn't scan for fungal signatures. We were looking for radiation and organic decay. Isael stood, wobbling slightly, bracing himself against the wall. You brought back infected metal. Metal coated in organic residue. We think it was part of a life support unit. Nyril crossed her arms. You said the parasite adapted to your treatments. Could it be using ship machinery to modify itself? Isael frowned. You think it's integrating tech? Not in the way you imagine, but some of our sensor arrays are going dead without explanation. Others are reading phantom heat signatures. We're seeing behavior we can't explain. He turned toward the nearest utility panel. Show me your maintenance schematics. I want to see the vent layout and where the salvage was stored. Nyril gestured to an attendant who brought a portable display. She keyed in the access codes and the schematic unfolded in front of them. There, Isael pointed. The containment bay where the cargo was held shares a ventilation loop with hydroponics and waste recovery. If spores traveled through there, they could have colonized the air scrubbers. Nyril nodded. That's consistent with the failures we've logged. But no one thought to check the scrubbers for infections. Isael tapped the screen. If I were a spore colony trying to hide, I'd go where there's warmth, humidity, and a steady trickle of nutrients and no one looking. Nyril snapped her fingers. A nearby officer turned. Send a drone to the tertiary filtration node. Scan for fungal biomass. The officer nodded and jogged off. Isael turned to Vel. I need to see what's growing down there. If the colony has taken root in your environmental systems, we're not dealing with isolated infections anymore. We're inside its habitat. Half an hour later, they stood in front of a long observation screen in the engineering deck. The drone feed showed a crawl space lined with copper tubing, now covered in a grayish-green fuzz that pulsed faintly. Nyril let out a slow breath. That's not just mold. It's moving. Isael leaned in. It's established a fruiting body. That's how it's generating spores. You've got a reproductive cluster inside your life support system. Vel's mandibles clicked together tightly. We can't burn that section without compromising oxygen flow. Then we'll have to kill it chemically, Isael said. But slowly, if you shock it, it'll release everything at once. You need to lull it. Nyril turned. You'll need access to the environmental microdosing systems. We use them for trace gas manipulation. Perfect, Isael said. I'll create a low-dose mist of the suppressive compound, trickle it in over a full cycle. It should sedate the colony. We'll need to isolate that loop, Vel added. If it leaks into the crew compartments, it won't, Isael interrupted. I'll bind the active agents to a heavier carrier. It'll settle out before it travels far. By the time the system was rigged, it was past the second rest cycle. Isael's arms were streaked with grease and sweat. He leaned over the chemical mixer, dripping the antifungal solution into the dispersal cartridge with the kind of care usually reserved for surgery. Vel monitored the pressure valves. You're sure this won't provoke it? No, Isael said. But if I'm wrong, you'll know in about 6 minutes. Nyril stood near the master panel. Initiating flow. The system hissed softly as the mist began to fill the ducts. The drone feed showed the fungal mass twitch once, then go still. The pulsing slowed. Minute by minute, the color faded from vibrant green to dull gray. Isael exhaled. That's what I wanted. It's dormant. The next hour was quiet. The drone continued its sweep. No new growth, no spore plumes, no reaction, but then, at the edge of the frame, something shifted. Isael leaned in. What is that? A thin strand of mycelium had extended toward a bundle of fiberoptic cable. It wrapped around the sheath, then split, following the line. It's moving into your data grid, Isael said. It's not done. Can it read the signals? Nyril asked. I doubt it understands them, but it doesn't need to. It's following warmth and electromagnetic traces, like a heat-seeking vine. Vel turned from the console. Then the antifungal isn't enough. We need a full sweep. No, Isael said. If you stress it, it'll scatter. We need to reverse the direction. Nyril's brow furrowed. What does that mean? make the cables toxic. Feed the grid a trace current with an embedded antifungal signal. Use the wiring as a delivery system. Vel blinked. We've never used the network for chemical dispersal. Isael gave him a tired look. Well, you're about to. It took them another 4 hours to rewire the delivery matrix. Isael adjusted the compound again, this time binding it to a polymer that could cling to the insulation inside the conduits. Once released, the current pushed the compound along the fibers like a bloodstream. The result was immediate. The tendrils recoiled. The colony shrank from the cables, curling in on itself. Nyril watched the display. It's retreating, Isael nodded. It's not dying. It's hiding. Do we follow it? Not yet, Isael said. Let it think it's safe, then we hit it again. From another angle, Vel closed the panel. You're treating this like a siege. Isael looked at him. It is a siege. We're not fighting a fungus. We're fighting instinct, survival. And it's doing exactly what anything intelligent would do when cornered. Nyril gestured toward the drone feed. Then what happens when it figures out we're smarter? Isael stepped back from the console. That's when we stop outsmarting it and start starving it. The ship's lights dimmed briefly as the environmental systems recalibrated. Somewhere deep in the wall, a soft groaning sound echoed like the hull was exhaling. Vel broke the silence. You do realize we've never encountered a pathogen like this before, Isael nodded, and I've never had to weaponize bread mold, first time for everything. Nyril looked at him. You're not a soldier. Nope, Isael said. I'm just a guy who knows how not to die when something green starts growing on his leftovers. Outside, the drone swept past the last visible tendril. The colony had vanished into the walls, but Isael didn't smile. He just stared at the screen, eyes narrowing. Now we see where it goes when it's scared. The fungal colony had vanished from the vents, but Isael wasn't convinced it had gone far. The air aboard the Calypso 4 felt heavier, not dangerous, just dense with the kind of silence that made people glance over their shoulders for no reason. He stood inside the auxiliary systems bay, sleeves rolled up, crouched with a scanner jammed beneath a relay junction. The readout showed a faint biosignature behind the paneling, weaker than before but still present. He tapped the casing. Still here, he muttered. What's it doing now? Asked Nyril, crouched on the other side of the conduit, her 3 fingers resting on a coiled cable like she was listening through it. It's not spreading, Isael said. It's hibernating or watching, Nyril grunted. It's a mold. Not a spy. He pulled the scanner out and shut the panel. You've never seen a mold survive 7 different chemical compounds, map itself through a ship's fiber network, and then retreat without resisting. That's not just survival. That's strategy. Vel's voice came through the intercom. Hydroponics cleared. We isolated the last of the spore clusters. No active bloom. Good, Isael said. Keep the UV fields running for another cycle and reinforce the nutrient filters. If it gets into the algae tanks, we'll be back where we started. He stood, joints aching, and stretched his back against the bulkhead. You look like you've aged a decade, Nyril said. I feel like I've aged too, he replied. What about the salvage cargo? Where's the rest of it? Nyril's mandibles twitched. We vented most of it into space, kept one piece under containment for study. Forward lab, deck 3. Isael grabbed a toolkit. Show me. The lab was sealed behind triple bulkheads with a decon chamber that hissed as they passed through. Inside, the salvaged panel sat in the center of an isolation chamber, suspended in a magnetic field. It was pitted with corrosion, its surface etched with looping grooves that looked almost biological. Isael stepped closer, examining the etched lines. This wasn't just exposed to the parasite. It was a part of it. Nyril folded her arms. You think the metal's infected? Not anymore, but it was shaped. These patterns, they're growth channels, like root structures. I think it used the panel as a scaffold. Why would it do that? Support, stability, maybe even communication. This thing doesn't just live in tissue. It uses whatever structure it can find. It's not just adapting to the environment, it's building it. Nyril's jaw tightened. Then we've been treating symptoms, not the cause. Isael nodded slowly. The infection starts in bodies, but it wants infrastructure. If it had time, it would have turned this ship into a greenhouse. They left the lab in silence. Back in the command deck, Vel was hunched over a console, running diagnostics on the internal sensor web. "Something strange," he said without looking up. "One of the long-range dishes keeps resetting. We thought it was signal interference, but it's cycling at regular intervals, every 6 minutes. Is that automatic?" Isael asked. "No, manual override." "From where?" Vel gestured to the lower decks. "Maintenance Junction 17. Isael's stomach sank. That was right below the waste heat exchangers, the warmest place on the ship. He turned to Nyril. "If it's down there, it's not hiding. It's trying to reach out." Nyril's eyes narrowed. "You think it's calling something?" Isael didn't answer. He was already moving. The maintenance corridors were narrow and poorly lit, and the deeper they went, the more the temperature climbed. Isael's skin prickled under his coveralls. The bulkheads here were older, less shielded, easier to tunnel through. He stopped at Junction 17. The panel was ajar. Something had melted the sealant. Nyril reached for her weapon, but Isael signaled her back. "Hold on. If it's trying to signal, we need to know what it's sending." He pulled out a portable scanner and tuned it to intercept transmissions. The signal was faint, pulsing slowly. Not data, just a rhythmic pulse, like sonar. Vel's voice came through the comms. "We tapped into the channel. It's not broadcasting coordinates, it's a resonance tone." Nyril frowned. "For what?" Isael's face went pale. "Spores don't need instructions, they need conditions. This isn't a message. It's a trigger." The pulse stopped, then the wall panel hissed. A section of conduit bulged outward and a thin stream of gray mist seeped through. Isael backed away, grabbing a canister from his pack. "Seal the deck," he shouted. Now, Vel's voice crackled. "Confirmed. Emergency lockdown in progress." Nyril pulled Isael back as the conduit burst open. A fibrous mass slithered out, twitching. But it didn't attack. It reached toward the overhead wiring, brushing the cable gently. Isael hurled the canister. It bounced once and released a cloud of antifungal mist. The tendrils recoiled instantly, curling in on themselves with a dry, crackling sound. They waited. Nothing moved. Nyril stepped forward and jabbed the mass with the barrel of her sidearm. It didn't respond. Isael moved closer and took a sample. It tried to trigger a growth event. But it wasn't ready, the colony's still weak. Back in the lab, he ran the sample through analysis. The spores were malformed, half-grown, unstable. He stared at the screen. "It's losing cohesion. It's trying to grow faster than it can sustain. It's burning out." Vel entered, holding a small box. "We found this in the same duct. It's one of your syringes." "Empty." Isael took it, frowning. "That's impossible. I accounted for every dose." Nyril leaned over his shoulder. "Could it have replicated your compound?" "No," Isael said. "It doesn't know how to synthesize." "But it might have hoarded some, tested it, tried to use it as fuel instead of medicine." Vel looked confused. "That would mean it doesn't understand the difference." Isael nodded slowly. "Exactly. It's intelligent but not wise. It mimics, reacts. But it doesn't comprehend, so it's failing," said Nyril. "It's trying to become something it doesn't understand," Isael said. "It's not evolving, it's spiraling." They initiated a full sweep of the ship, every duct, every panel, every circuit. Isael adjusted the antifungal compound to degrade faster, minimizing environmental impact. They released it in pulses over the next 12 hours. No new growth appeared. The biosignature readings dropped to 0. By the next cycle, the Calypso 4 was fungus-free. Isael sat in the mess hall, finally eating something solid, a protein bar that tasted mostly like chalk and cinnamon. Nyril joined him, carrying a steaming cup of something dark and bitter. "You look worse rested," she said. "I'll take that as a compliment." She sat across from him. "We're jettisoning the last of the salvage. Then we're heading back to the fleet. We'll report the incident to the council, with your notes." Isael nodded. "It shouldn't happen again, not if ships start treating mold like an invasive species instead of a joke." Vel entered, holding a small vial. Your blood work stabilized, the residuals are gone, you're clean. Isael took the vial and turned it in his fingers, so I'm not part mushroom anymore. Not unless you start growing out of your chair, Vel said. Isael smiled faintly. There are worse ways to go. Nyril raised her cup. To survival and to mold. They clinked their drinks together. Vel sat down beside them. You know, we still don't know where the original spores came from. Isael shook his head. Doesn't matter, it's gone and it won't be back. We adapted first. They ate in silence for a moment. Then Isael said, I'm going back to Earth when this is over. I've got a fridge full of Petri dishes waiting. Nyril raised an eyebrow. You're going back to mold. I never left it, Isael said. Besides, it never tried to hijack a spaceship back home. It just eats drywall. Vel nodded. You humans are strange. Isael leaned back in his chair. You have no idea.